Welcome to the some number over 20 annual American Ideals Lecture Series. Maybe someday I will figure out what that number is. This is a lecture series sponsored by the School of Public and International Affairs, where we try and bring in speakers and thinkers to discuss current issues of debate and controversy and thought, but provide a deeper understanding and context and put them into that context of American history, American ideas. And Also want to thank the Honors Program for co-sponsoring this speaker series with us. So today's speaker is Ben Wittes. He is perfect for today's environment where I think a lot of us have concerns about issues involving presidential authority, rule of law, national security. He is a senior fellow at Brookings and editor-in-chief of lawfare.org, which, if you follow legal and, quote, thorny national security issues, you are familiar with Lawfare. It is the go-to place. He does all the media, writes all sorts of things, podcasts. I will say it was, I don't know, some months ago, I was listening to a podcast. I was like, oh yeah, that needs to be our speaker this year. And I made it. So me and Captain Picard were like that. So I will spare further details about his illustrious knowledge and career so that we have more time to hear from our speakers. So please help me and welcome me, Ben Wittes.
I'm actually going to use that. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Something about holding a mic up to my own face that I kind of like. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. I actually am taking the liberty of live streaming this. I don't usually hold a phone up to my face, and I'm going to ignore the fact that there's a phone there. But in case you thought I was particularly odd walking up to a stage, filming myself as I go, that was the reason. The topic at hand is how much less free are we? And I want to start by unpacking a little bit of that question, because first of all, there's at least two assumptions embedded in that question that we should surface. The first is that we are at least somewhat less free, and we're measuring how much. And there may be some people in the audience or more generally who actually dispute the premise. And so I want to acknowledge that at the outset and say we're going to talk about the premise and ask, try to use this time together to do a little bit of measurement. And maybe the amount that we're less free is negative. That is to say, we're more free. So we'll try to do a little bit of calculation as to, what the coefficient is and what the sign in front of whatever the coefficient is. The second thing I want to focus on in the question is the word we. Because one of the things I'd like to persuade you of today is that there is not really a we in a polity. There is groups of people, some of whom may be more free than they were, and some of whom may be less free than they were. And when we say we, we're doing a little bit of a cheat, which is to say we're saying, I'm going to take the people that I care most about, and I'm going to elevate their relative freedom or lack of freedom over the people that I don't care as much about. And I'm going to decide that we collectively are kind of represented by the people I care about. And so, first of all, I want to say just at the outset, I'm going to do that tonight. But unlike a lot of people you may hear from on this subject, I'm going to tell you that I'm doing it. And I'm going to walk you through why I care more about the liberty of the people that I care about and the freedom of the people that I care about than the people who I care about less. And I'm going to try to answer this question with reference to the people whose liberty I think is most important to a functioning democratic society. Um, so if it's not obvious from that, I want to say that, freedom is not a rheostat. It's not a single rheostat. Think of a soundboard, right? Or a graphic equalizer where you have a lot of levers that you can move. And each one represents somebody's or some group of people's freedom. And you have to decide when we say that word we, you're talking about a configuration of the graphic equalizer, not a single dial, it's not the master volume. At least since Hobbes, and I was trying to think whether there's an earlier articulation of this, but there at least is not an earlier one that's as good. Um, Hobbes observes, right, that you actually give away a little bit of your freedom. In his vision, a lot of your freedom, right? That's the idea of the Leviathan, right? You're giving essentially all the political power to the entity that can protect you. You're investing literally the right of life and death over you and your fellow citizens. And in exchange for that, and this is the original contractarian vision of this is why Hobbes is a liberal, right? Or one of the origins of the liberal tradition. You get the protection of the enjoyment of your rights. Um, and that's the essential bargain. And, all of the liberal tradition is a refinement of that contractarian bargain. A lot of people did it better than Hobbes. But if you think about it, that's not a rheostat that he's talking about. That's about how much liberty you have to give away in order to enjoy the residual. And so everything I'm going to say, I want you to think about in terms of who's being asked to give away freedom in order for whom to enjoy the residual. I'm going to try to avoid value judgments and then until the end, and then I'm going to hit you hard with them. All right. So I want to start with the audience. Um, who feels a lot less free today than you did a year ago? Just make it sound. All right. So we got few people, 3, 4, 5, 10, maybe feel a lot less free. Who feels a little bit less free? That may be about plurality, close, maybe a majority. Who feels about the same amount of free that you did about a year ago? Interesting. Okay, so that's modest group. Who feels freer? 10 people? All right, so you see, it's a diversity of attitudes toward how you feel, even within the space of this room, where people's lives are much more similar than most Americans' lives will be, right? You're all students at the same university, you all are subject to the same rules of the university, and yet some of you feel everywhere between more free and much less free, depending on does anybody feel much more free? Got one. Okay. So W.S. Gilbert, Lord High Executioner in the Mikado, comes up with a little list famously, I have a little list of people he'd like to execute. If the need ever arises for him to actually perform his functions as an executioner. I came up with two little lists. The first was of categories of people who are actually more free. The second is of categories of people who are actually less free. And I want to be sort of clinical about this because there are actually groups of people in both categories. And um, so let's start with the people who are more free. Um, if you are actually, I don't usually do this. I actually wrote these lists down. I usually pride myself in speaking without notes, but the lists got long, so I wrote them down. All right, here is category one. You are indisputably more free today than you were a year ago if you were charged with or convicted of a crime in connection with the January 6th protests, right? We're not going to get any argument about that. Well, that's 1,500 people. And if anybody knows any of those 1,500 people and they say, hey, what are you talking about? How much less free you are? I used to be in prison and now I'm not. I got no argument with that person. Um, let's just say uh, that may be a dubious accomplishment for human liberty. And one of the things that I'm going to sort of emphasize here as I go through this list of people who are more free is that some of these raise this question, is this a good thing that this group of people is more free? Some of them don't. They're judgments about who we want to favor and disfavor in society. But some of them I do have that question about. And 1,500 convicted criminals or charged criminals accused of, and in most cases convicted of, assaulting the transition of power. I'm not sure it is a good thing for liberty in general that they are more free. This brings me to a few categories of people who are more free that I don't know a good English word for. So I'm going to introduce you to a word that comes from originally from Russian, but the use that I'm using it here actually comes through Hebrew. The word is protexia. And the word protexia in Russian and in Ukrainian actually means that you've hired some protection. It has an implication of an organized crime. Either you've bought protection from an organized crime gang, or sometimes that you have um, uh, sometimes just that you've hired private security because that's what Moscow was like in the 80s and 90s. Um, the Israelis have a different connotation of this word, which is that you're untouchable for some reason of political preference, as in, you can't go after so and so, he has protexia. And it means it has implications of favoritism, it has implications of corruption, and it has implications that he has something you don't have. Um, I want to say that there are a group of people, categories of people, and the January 6th perpetrators are a good example of them, who have a certain protexia that we did not understand to exist in our society a year ago. Let's talk about a few of them. One of them is crypto bros. So a year ago, people were really talking about how to regulate crypto, right? And now and by the way, the same is true of sort of AI accelerationists. Note, this is a policy issue. It's not, it has some corruption valences to it, but there are good arguments that the Mark Andreessens of the world can make for not regulating crypto, for not regulating AI. And I'm not saying there's no argument to make. I am saying if you're in the crypto business right now, if you're in the AI development world, you are freer than you were a year ago. And there are things that you had to worry about the government getting involved in to stop you from doing a year ago, and you don't have to worry about that today. And by the way, that's also true if you are, say, a company that is connected to, and this is where the protexia comes in. If you are a Trump family business that is creating stable coins, you're not worrying about enforcement right now. There's a lot of that. Um, white collar criminals. public corruption in general, the corruption infrastructure of the Justice Department has been, I wouldn't say completely dismantled, but largely dismantled. A lot of people have been fired, and they show no sign of replacing any of it. Um, and so if you are, this is not career advice for you guys, and I do remind you that the statutes of limitations on a lot of public corruption stuff will progress, goes further than this administration. So it's not without risk to decide you want to enter a life of white collar crime right now. But if you do, your chances of enforcement now are quite low. And a lot of people are seeing that and they're feeling more free. Um, Again, query if this is a good thing or a bad thing. It is increasing certain aspects of human freedom. Um, Cops are a really interesting category. And there are cops who are much more free today, and there are cops that are much less free today. Going to talk about the ones who are less free in my less free list. Let's talk about the ones who are more free. If you're into brutalizing people, you're freer. Um, I don't know how to say that in a way that does not sound politically confrontational. Um, but we've all seen the ICE videos. And by the way, we've all seen the videos that ICE releases and that Kristi Noem releases of what she is proud that DHS is doing. If you're into roughing up protesters, and I say that as somebody, I do a lot of protesting, which I'm going to talk about in a little while. I, if you like being scary to protesters as a member of law enforcement, uh, you are freer than you were a year ago. And I'll talk about that experience a little bit from the protester side in a minute. Um, the amount of enforcement of this is particularly true at the federal level. I don't, state level law enforcement is a different animal and is extremely diverse. But at the federal level, you're not getting in trouble right now for being a little too rough with the immigrant you're detaining. Um, uh, and that is a kind of freedom. If you happen not to be that immigrant, if you happen to be that law enforcement officer who's kind of into it, right? There's a kind of freedom, such as it is, in not having to worry that the person you're mistreating is going to be the next Rodney King or is going to be the next take your pick of a long list. Corrupt politicians, and here I think the argument. This is a really striking example. Um, Eric Adams, mayor of New York, George Santos, just freed from federal prison. These are indisputably corrupt politicians. Note that they are from different political parties. This is not a political point. They are freer, And if you're a politician who is considering taking $50,000 in a bag from Kava, uh, or a political advisor to the president, you're just freer to do it than you were a year ago. And they have announced this in almost explicit terms, right? So when the Kava bag incident happened, no one's attempted to say that you know this was a perfectly normal business transaction that happens where you're selling government contracts and access for an administration you're not even a part of yet. The answer is we don't care. And that is a form of freedom, right? The freedom to do things with impunity. Um, all right, let's get into some more controversial stuff. Let's say you really, really hate LGBT people and you're not content to do it quietly. Um, you've always been free to do it quietly, but you actually want a kind of uh, place in the public stage to do it. And you really want to regulate what bathrooms people are allowed to use. You're freer than you were a year ago. Um, Full stop, end of story. Now, again, you can ask the question, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Are you trampling on somebody else's freedom? We're going to get to all that. But are you freer to do it? Yeah. Um, Here's one that's not so culturally difficult. What if you sell a product that's become globally uncompetitive and your business is still viable because of tariffs? You're freer than you were a year ago. Again, perfectly legitimate policy issue. Category of people who are freer. They're being relieved of the burdens of global competitiveness. Are you named Vladimir Putin? Or do you work for somebody who's named Vladimir Putin, directly or indirectly? Either of the above, you're freer than you were a year ago. All right, here's a general category that's very emotionally difficult, and a refinement, a special case within that category. Are you a racist? So this is a complicated category because racism has never been illegal. You've never been unfree to be a racist. And in fact, it's constitutionally protected. And it's no more or less constitutionally protected than it was a year ago. And yet, there is no doubt in my mind that racists feel freer than they felt a year ago. And why is that? That's because there is a social condemnation of their attitudinal choices in life, and their belief systems that was very fierce until it began to be dismantled. And so, without any rules changing or laws changing or the Constitution changing, people feel freer. Now, let's talk about a special category within racism: anti Semitism. And here, the question is really interesting. Are you freer to be an anti Semite or less free to be an anti Semite? And I think, and I say this with some amusement, that the nature of your anti-Semitism actually governs the answer to that question. If you're a white supremacist, or and you hate Jews for sort of traditional Nazi reasons, see the previous point. You're just freer to do that, feel to be expressive in that regard than you were a year ago. If you hate Jews because you like Hamas and because you hate the Israeli government so much, and you can't distinguish between the Israeli government and a local synagogue, you're a lot less free than you were a year ago. Um, so it matters why you hate Jews, um, for this calculation. Similar to the racism example is the kind of overt Christian nationalism example, right? You are simply, again, the rules have not changed, but there is just a level, a sense of people feel freer. These two categories are actually, there's a really interesting political sciencey data point in this, which is that if you look at the statistics of right-wing political violence over the last year, it's plummeted. Violence is something people do when they don't necessarily feel empowered. if you feel like the administration is representing you don't have reason to blow something up or to kill somebody. Um, so if I sound like I am uh, being emphasizing groups of people whose freedom may not be such a great thing to increase, I will say two things. First, in the spirit of honesty, yes, I am. But secondly, in the spirit of honesty, I couldn't think of, and I've been thinking about this talk for a few weeks now, other groups of people to name whose liberty has meaningfully been increased in this environment. Um, there are some, and I want to give you a caveat to that, which is that there are a bunch of, I have a friend who was held hostage in Iraq for 2 years and tortured very brutally. And she is free today because Donald Trump's hostage point person, it's a man named Adam Bowler, uh, is an enormously effective individual and really cares about getting hostages, U.S. hostages. And in Elizabeth's case, she's not a U.S. citizen. She's a graduate student here. Um, he cares. And so there are 40 some odd American hostages who this administration has gotten out of sometimes just terrible, terrible conditions. And I want to acknowledge that. That is a significant accomplishment for human liberty, including for somebody that I care very deeply about. Um, that was the only category I could think of where I could say, okay, somebody whose liberty I think it is an unalloyed public good to increase is doing better. Um, I want to give them credit for that. I don't. I know there are people who do not like it when I say you got to hand it to Trump on X, but I'm going to say it. My friend Eliza is not being tortured today because of that, and I want to keep score accurately. Um, all right, that's what I can do on the expanding human liberty side. Let's talk about the people who are less free. Um, so if you're an undocumented immigrant, you're really less free than you were a year ago. And I know that there are people in the room who say, that's not my problem because they broke the law and they're here illegally. And so their liberty is not of concern to me. And I want to say, I respect that, actually. I, I, I disagree with it, but I respect that that is a position that one could take, much as I say, hey, I'm not that concerned about the liberty of the January 6th perpetrators. It's perfectly fair for you to say, hey, I have a lot of concerns in my life, and the liberty of a somebody who came here illegally or has been living here illegally is just not high on my list. Okay. Um, let's talk about some of the people who are adjacent to the illegal or undocumented migrants. Uh, does anybody know what TPS is? Okay, we got like two, three hands. TPS is temporary protected status. And these are people who come here legally under a promise from the United States that the condition that in their countries are so horrible and so dangerous that we will give them temporary shelter here. They can work. And by the way, when conditions in their country improve, that's the end of TPS, right? It's not an immigration status, permanent immigration status. It's a temporary thing. So we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people here from Haiti, from Venezuela, and from Ukraine. Um, Now, one of the things about TPS is that it's discretionary. You can turn it off. And for the Haitians and the Venezuelans, the administration turned it off. All of those people, and it's hundreds of thousands of people, became undocumented migrants the day they didn't leave, and that happened. Um, I care about their freedom a lot. Um, I do a lot of work with Ukrainians for a whole bunch of unrelated reasons. They're all here. All the ones I work with are here on TPS. Uh, Trump has not turned off the temporary protected status of Ukraine. And I want to thank him for that. But I also want to observe that that might have something to do with the fact that Ukrainians here on TPS are uniformly white. They are uniformly comport with a kind of vision of what good immigrants are. And let's face it, they also comport with traditional American beauty standards. Um, it's not fair. And I'm not asking that Trump turn on the Ukrainian TPS people, some of whom are very dear to my heart. I am saying what makes them really different from the Haitians, what makes them really different from the Venezuelans. And we all know the answer to that question. People who are here undocumented have families. Their families are citizens often. They marry citizens. They have children who are citizens. Uh, and when you round them up in an indiscriminate fashion, one of the things that happens is that you round up their families, you round up people who are actually US citizens. And that has happened a lot. And so, what I would say to you is even if you don't care about the people who are actually here unlawfully, I want you to spend a little bit of time, or I want to urge you to spend a little bit of time caring about the people adjacent to them, the TPS recipients who were turned into illegal immigrants like that because of nothing that they did, the families of people who are meaningfully, who may be deportable themselves, but who have no business being locked up and detained. Um, these people are less free, and however you define we, they are part of it. At least, however, in my opinion, one reasonably defines we. Um, Protesters. Let's talk about protesters. I have some personal experience with this. In one of my other lives, um, I spend a lot of time harassing Russian diplomats. I do this with projectors, and some of you may have seen videos of this. I project Ukrainian flags on the Russian embassy in Washington. I've been sanctioned by the Russian government. I'm not allowed to travel to Russia anymore, a deprivation I bear daily. Um, and um, and I have had a number of interactions with U.S. federal law enforcement, which is responsible for protecting the Russian embassy. Uh, in full disclosure, I have also not always obeyed the law, um, though I think of myself as a law-abiding kind of guy. I am reminded frequently of Ralph Waldo Emerson's famous line, "Good men must not obey the laws too well." And I think when you're talking about whether the day or two after the president does something truly outrageous to the president of Ukraine in a fashion designed to humiliate him, was it wrong of me to decide that maybe I would project my discomfort with that and anger at that on, say, the Washington Monument. And the first time I did that, I had no interaction with the United States Park Police at all. And they didn't show up. And by the way, I have projected pro Ukrainian slogans on the Hirshhorn Museum, on the National Gallery, on the Air and Space Museum. It's something I do. And I'm happy to accept whatever consequences come my way as a result of it. As you can see, I'm not denying it, and this could be used against me in court, which I welcome. The second time I projected on the Washington Monument, about 10 police cars showed up with their sirens screaming, and the National Park Police seized all of my laser gear, all of my cameras, all of my tripods, which they still have custody over. And I am not feeling sorry for myself. I signed up for that. I am observing that the space for political protest in tension with the law is a lot narrower than it was a year ago. Let me give you another example. This one is a controlled political, it's a genuinely controlled experiment for political science purposes. Um, in Washington, D.C., if you draw on the sidewalk with chalk, that's called playing hopscotch, and it didn't used to be illegal. If you spray paint on the street, that is not okay. The police don't like that. And so about a year and a half ago, or I'm sorry, less than that, a year ago, I had a fun idea, which was what if I went to the Russian embassy with 100 pounds of blue and yellow chalk, blue and yellow being the colors of the Ukrainian flag, and I poured it on the sidewalk in front of the embassy and swept it into the sidewalk and made a Ukrainian flag. Uh, would it annoy them? Would it annoy the U.S. Secret Service, which protects the embassy? And I have a very good relationship with the Secret Service. They have protected me from embassy thugs. They're a law enforcement agency I have a long and productive relationship with. And so, as a courtesy to the Secret Service, as well as so that there would be no surprises, and you can see this, I videotaped the whole thing, and it's on my Instagram page, along with a bunch of other things. I did a walkthrough with a Secret Service officer of exactly what I was going to do, and showed him the chalk, showed him the broom, here, I'm going to do it. And he walks with me through it. And you can hear him on the thing. He says, as long as it's chalk, you got no problem with me. By that, he meant not spray paint, not anything permanent, something that will wash away when the Russians come out with their hose, which they did. And it is a matter of some pride to me that I got the Russian embassy staff to come out of the embassy with a hose to get rid of a chalk mark. And so I did it. And I filmed myself doing it, and I put it on Instagram and, blah, blah, blah. So a year later, I decided to do the same thing again because I knew the cops wouldn't have a problem with it. And so I did it again. This time, 5 police cars showed up with their lights streaming. And I informed them of everything that I just talked to you about. And they informed me that their supervisor was not on duty then. And they called it in, and they had a long conversation about it. And you can watch all of this on which was all filmed. And they informed me that if I continued, they would arrest me. And what statute would they arrest me under? A DC municipal ordinance. These are federal law enforcement officers. This is the United States Secret Service. DC municipal ordinance that prohibits defacing public property. which means that every time you play hopscotch in DC, anytime you draw a butterfly or rainbow in chalk with a 5-year-old on the sidewalk, you are now risking arrest by the United States Secret Service. And guess what? That's not going to happen to you because it's not a political protest. But if you are operating in the space of confrontational political protests, you are less free. And I can tell you that from personal experience. All right. Very special category of political protesters. I started by talking about the Hebrew word protetsia, which is really a Russian word or Ukrainian word. Let's talk about Palestinian protesters. Because if you're a Palestinian protester, you are dramatically less free than you were. Um, the administration will come after your university if they're too tolerant of you. They won't, they might not even come after you. They'll come after the whole university. The administration will revoke your visa status if you are not an American citizen. And there are at least 3 ongoing cases of that. These are people who were here legally on a valid visa, and the administration decided, because of their First Amendment protected activity, to change their visa status, make them illegal, and then arrest them. Now, I feel very aggrieved about my little chalk stuff and the fact that I have some number of thousands of dollars of lighting equipment that's currently in the custody of the United States Park Police. But the truth of the matter is that I'm kind of joking about myself. But this is not a joke. This is people who are less free because they will literally be arrested, detained, and thrown out of the country without having done anything illegal. They are not projecting lights on the Washington Monument. They are not violating a DC municipal ordinance. They are writing op-eds. Okay? I just want to say, if you are that is a scary proposition. Let's talk about law firms. I do a lot of work with law firms. I write about law firms. I get represented by law firms. I criticize law firms. That's some nasty stuff. Going after a law firm because of the clients they represent. You know, John Adams, founding father, second president of the United States, first vice president, right? How did he become famous? Does anybody remember? He represented the British soldiers who shot American protesters in the Boston Massacre. Unpopular representations. That's how John Adams became famous. That's how he became an important figure, because he was willing to do defense lawyering when it counted. By the way, his guy got acquitted. I'm not going to talk about universities because we're in one. You guys probably know more about the university environment than I do. I will just say, when you are coming after universities, there are whole categories of people within that who are less free as a result. All right, let's talk about political enemies of the president, and this one is a little bit close to home for me. Jim Comey is a good personal friend of mine, and somebody I care about a lot, and is not guilty of lying to Congress. I have every confidence that Jim will be exonerated. And by the way, I don't know Letitia James personally. But I have every confidence that Letitia James will be exonerated. The indictment against her is defective on its face. And in both of these two cases, there is only one reason these people have been indicted and prosecuted. There is only one, and that is that the president hates them. Uh, I think both Jim and Letitia James would tell you that the environment they are living in is less free. Um, I have um, I have to say, my mere proximity to the Comey case, I was involved in not in the events that he's been being prosecuted for, but in other stuff that was going on at the same time. Some of it was very well publicized. I went to the New York Times with some information, which I did, by the way, on the record in my own name. There was never a secret about what I was doing. Um, it hits close to home when they start indicting people frivolously for stuff that is not that I was involved in, but that I was a few steps away from. Dan Richman is a good friend of mine, the guy who is at issue in this case. You feel less free when that happens. And now I want to talk about John Bolton, who is somebody I've met once in my life, disliked intensely. And by the way, most people who meet John Bolton dislike him intensely. One of the things you'll hear about John Bolton is, it burns me up. And this is what everybody says. I really don't like having to stand up for John Bolton, but, or I really dislike him, but what's going on is a travesty, blah, blah, blah. He's not a popular guy. He's got that horrible mustache. Um, and and he may be guilty of some crimes. I don't know. But there's some stuff in the indictment that's disturbing in contrast to Letitia James and Jim Comey. Um, and yet, John Bolton is facing criminal charges today because Donald Trump hates him. And I remind you that every one of you who has ever smoked or consumed a marijuana product has violated federal criminal law. And so John Bolton is, in some sense, kind of like every one of you, which is to say, we have all committed federal crimes. There are those of us who kid ourselves about it and pretend that we've never committed a federal crime. Don't kid yourself. And John Bolton is facing the music for whatever crimes he may or may not have committed, not because they are the worst thing that anybody's ever done with classified information. Some of them are pretty bad if he did them. He's facing it because he criticized Donald Trump, and Donald Trump hates him. And so John Bolton is every one of us. He is somebody who has committed crimes, assuming he has, and that if somebody hates you enough, they can find out what you did and go after you. And in that sense, he is the one who disturbs me the most, because he is all of us. And even though he might be guiltier than the others, he might actually have some real criminal exposure. There are people in this room who have real criminal exposure. I've said it. I'm one of them. I projected on the Washington Monument. There's a law that says you can't violate a federal reg involving, the National Park Service. And by the way, there's a reg that says you're not allowed to project on monuments. I am guilty. And why am I not today being prosecuted? Because the president doesn't hate me enough That's not a safe environment for any of you to live in. Um, I want to talk about a type of group that probably you guys don't spend a lot of time thinking about. Foundations, big pots of money, and they spend the money on things that they feel like supporting. Uh, the president doesn't like certain foundations. They're all going to be subject to investigations. They're all going to be, to some degree, intimidated. The activist groups that they fund, you don't have to believe me about this. Go look at the executive order in which the president announced that this is what's going to happen. He's going to investigate or have investigated a bunch of foundations giving money to a bunch of activist organizations that are engaged in activity that he doesn't like. Did some of them make accounting errors? Probably. I run a nonprofit organization. It's actually hard to, it's actually a hard thing to do. And if you look at every grantee that the George Soros, the Open Society Foundation, or the MacArthur Foundation has ever given money to, and then you demand information from every single one of those, are you going to turn up somebody who made a mistake, who you can then turn into a Letitia James? If you hate them enough, absolutely. Is that a good thing for human freedom? You could say the same thing about journalists. Putting pressure on journalistic organizations, putting pressure on individual journalists, putting pressure on organizations that need your regulatory approval for things that happen to own journalism organizations, whether it's Paramount or Disney. And by doing that, you put pressure on comedians, many of them. You hear about the Jimmy Kimmels, but do you hear about the ones who get quietly told, hey, you're going to be on Sunday, don't do anything too controversial, okay? And they just know not to do something too controversial because they're less free. The organizations that are putting them on television are less free. And as a result, they're less free. And we never hear about that. All right, I want to talk about cops again. We talked about the cops who were kind of get off on the brutalization stuff. They're more free. I work a lot with people in law enforcement by the nature of what lawfare does. Earlier this year, some of you may have read about this. An FBI agent named Mike Feinberg was uh, put in a terrible position. He was hauled in and told that he was likely to be demoted. And that was the best case scenario because of a personal friendship he maintained with a man named Peter Strzok, who's also a personal friend of mine, who is, for reasons too complicated to go into right now, but have to do with the Russia investigation from 8 years ago, a matter of personal hatred to Donald Trump. So Mike, who was the assistant special agent in charge of the Norfolk field office, and was the acting special agent in charge of the Norfolk field office at the time, was put in a position where he either had to beg and plead and be demoted or resign. And so he works for Lawfare now. And he writes about uh, what the position that the FBI is putting honest people in. The number of firings has been astonishing. Career FBI agents do not get fired as a general matter for anything other than egregious misconduct. Um, that's over. Now they get fired for reasons of political loyalty. One of them, a gentleman named Special Agent Jardina, he was fired while his wife was dying of cancer. Um, and the list of purges at the FBI, there's been a lot of news coverage of it. It's worse than the news has been able to get to. Um, of all the agents who've been fired, only Michael Feinberg speaks publicly. And Mike wasn't actually fired, he resigned, but a lot of them are being forced to resign. He he's the only one who's speaking about it publicly because people need to go on with their lives, because they need to make a living, because uh, they are less free. So to be an honest cop right now is a very hard thing to be. The pressures are really intense, and the costs, if you don't fall in line, are really, really high. And that's true of prosecutors too. The Justice Department fired Maureen Comey because her last name is Comey. She is Jim's daughter. Does anybody know what she was doing at the time that she was dismissed? She was the chief prosecutor for a woman named Ghislaine Maxwell. She's a sex crimes prosecutor. Uh, the number of people who have been fired in the Eastern District of Virginia because they will not bring cases against people like Letitia James or Jim Comey, it's the numbers are getting pretty big now. Um, if you're going to be an honest public servant, it's all going on in the intelligence community too. You are less free than you used to be. And by the way, you may not be employed anymore. And if you're employed today, you may not be tomorrow. And you know that. Do you have ethical or legal limits? Are there things you will not do? If so, and you are working in the federal government, you're less free than you used to be. Um, because you know, this is true in the sciences too, by the way. I'm an NIH brat by background. Both of my parents were NIH scientists. The bloodletting that's going on in that community is unbelievable. And the CDC and, our traditional healthcare communities or health sciences communities. If there are things that you will not do for ethical or legal reasons, you are at risk. And you know you are at risk. And that makes you less free. Finally, I have two more categories of people who are less free than they were a year ago. Um, One is anybody who's afraid of the people in the list of folks that are more free. So if you have reason to be afraid of racists, you are less free than you were a year ago. If you have reason to think a January 6th might retaliate against you for some reason or might rape you, some of them have been accused of a variety of crimes following their summary pardons. You are less free than you used to be. If you're somebody who believes that public corruption threatens you in some way, maybe because your business can't compete against businesses that are cutting in folks that are in power because they have protectia and you don't, you are less free than you were. And finally, I really would not, it would be wrong of me to end without talking at least a little bit um, about the category of people whose freedom has most disappeared over the last year, and that is elected Republican officials. Um, I, I use slavery metaphors very sparingly. But if you are an elected Republican official, particularly in the Congress of the United States, query whether you are actually a free actor at all. Show me something you have done that shows that you are capable or allowed, because it's not capable of, it's that there is a form of bondage that has happened to these people. They are doing things on a daily basis they absolutely know to be at odds with their oaths of office. They are covering for things that other people are doing that are just shocking. They are not criticizing things that they have a sworn duty to criticize. And they are enabling things that they know to be antithetical to the Constitution. And I just cannot think of any show of lack of freedom more dramatic than that. When you know that everybody knows that you are enslaved, or maybe the better word would be indentured, to an authoritarian environment, and you know that we know that you know that we know that you are willingly subjecting yourself to that because you do not have the independence, the freedom to say, sorry, I'm out. Um, and there is not one member of Congress from the Republican side who has shown that freedom in this Congress. Um, at least not on anything other than the most episodic of bases. And so I want to say, ironically, that the category of people for who are the least free right now in this regime are Republican elected officials, and they show that every day. I have one more thing to say, and then I'm going to stop. Um, the other night, I mentioned Eliza Tsurkov, um, who is my friend, though we've never met in person. Actually, we had a bit of a texting relationship when before she was captured, and we had a Twitter relationship. And I've become close to her family as they tried to get her out. I never thought we would communicate again. It's not. I did not expect her to survive the experience. And the other night, she texted me. She's in Israel, and so the time difference is big. So it was the middle of the night in Washington, and she texted me that she had discovered my mischief videos that I had made, the chalk and the garbage sunflowers, and the I also do get ready with me videos where I talk about, important issues like how to handle having one gray eyebrow and one black eyebrow, and the Pete Hegseth nomination, things like that. And she had she'd been catching up on things that she'd missed while she was being tortured. And she'd found these videos, and she sent me an audiogram on WhatsApp of her reaction to it. And she told me that um, when she was being tortured, um, the having a sense of humor and being able to maintain a sense of humor was the essential thing for her. And that, and this is the only funny story you are ever going to hear from me or anybody else about being tortured by terrorists. But she gave as an example of this the bully who was torturing her, who liked the images from movies of the interrogator blowing cigarette smoke in the detainee or the subject's face. And she said there was one problem, which was that he used a vape, not a cigarette, and that it was a strawberry scented vape. And so she said, like he would, in this menacing kind of machismo way, blow smoke in her face, only it wasn't smoke and it smelled like strawberries. And there's nothing less intimidating than having somebody blow a strawberry vape in your face. And I just want to say that nobody is less free than the person who is being tortured. And she has physical injuries that will follow her the rest of her life. And she chose to be free. And that's what I wish for you all. Thank you. Oh, well, why don't I give you this because so that you
Well, just a couple of questions here. There's probably people want to walk a lot. You are free to ask questions. So I'm going to start right from it. How do you feel about the verdict in Trump USA?
you mean the immunity verdict? So I have a funny relationship with that because I was one of the first two commentators to say that it would be taken seriously. The first was Ruth Marcus, my former colleague at the Washington Post, and the second was me. Um, and so I was not surprised that the Supreme Court took it more seriously than a lot of people expected it to. I was shocked at the fact that six justices signed that opinion. I never would have imagined that John Roberts would have written that opinion. I think it is profoundly wrong in important respects. And I don't think it mattered very much at all. I think uh, Trump is president today not because of anything to do with how that case was decided, but because of the fact that uh, those of us who opposed him did not make the case persuasively that this was a genuine threat to American democratic government, and we failed. And I cannot blame the Supreme Court for that.
Make it easy, Kurt.
So with everything going on in the world today and media were covering the funny things that Trump used to look like, or the more shocking manner, like the ball into the White House, what do you suggest to do to actually know what's happening in the world?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. So first of all, I do want to defend the media on the point of the ballroom. Bulldozing the East Wing of the White House is not a trivial thing. The last time the White House was razed to the ground, it was by the British during the War of 1812. And I do think, as a almost lifelong resident of Washington, uh, there are some sacred symbols. And I say that as somebody who projects slogans on the Washington Monument. I'm not sentimental about these things, but I do think that I do, a part of every Washingtonian's heart broke that day. And I have not gotten over it. And so I want to be, I want to be respectful of the shock that a lot of people in the press had about that. Look, I have three pieces of advice for people who want to follow the news in a serious way. The first is do not let your social media feeds be your news sources. Um, what Twitter or TikTok or Meta thinks you want, which is a subject I write about a lot because they are convinced these algorithms are absolute. This is going to sound untoward, and I really don't mean it to. I do a lot of work, as I say, with the Ukrainian community. The Ukrainian community in the United States is overwhelmingly female and overwhelmingly young. And so the logical conclusion of that, from that, if you're that I'm connected to a whole bunch of Ukrainian young women, is that I'm in the market for human trafficking. And that is what all social media sites decide about me. And they feed me algorithmically stuff that is unbelievably disgusting. And why would I trust them to decide what news I'm interested in? And so the first piece of advice, they can't even decide what kind of people I'm interested in or why. Um, so why, the first thing to do is you have to make affirmative decisions about what sort of media organizations you trust. Um, you have to, and that has to, your consumption has to flow from that judgment. And it's really counterintuitive to people in your age demographic, but it's really, really important because otherwise you are not in control. You think you're in control because you decide who you subscribe to on the sites and you describe what you like, but you are not in control of the media diet that you are being fed. Decide whom you trust. Consume information from the people and entities and news sources that you trust. That is an affirmative set of decisions on your part. That's thing number one. Thing number two, do not think you can substitute with audio or video content for things to read. That's not to say I'm not being picky about whether you read by having something, a computer read it out loud to you or listen to it by audio. There is a density of information contained in written work product. I'm a producer of a lot of podcasts. I have two daily podcasts. It's not the same. I cannot communicate as much in a podcast, an hour-long podcast, as I can in a number of paragraphs. I cannot talk about things in ways that will cause the examples to be absorbed. They're different media. They're for different purposes. You can convince yourself that you don't need written material in order to be educated, but you're fooling yourself. I don't mean you. I mean one. I don't know I don't know your diet of information. Number three, take the time to figure out who's talking to you. This is part of, we all atmospherically get a lot of information from things that get fed to us. And I'm sorry to those who are joining on the live stream right now, but I have 3% left on my battery. And so you're all going to get cut off in a few minutes. And that's, I'm just nothing I can do about that. And I, we all pretend that we all get fed this information and you have a snap judgment to make. Am I going to investigate the provenance of this? Am I going to figure out, am I going to figure out what I think of the organization that produced it, the people that produced it? And 95% of the time, because we're busy, the answer to that is no. And that's okay. But you have to have two boxes in your head. One is for the stuff that you consumed and you experienced, and you took the time to figure out that it was true. And the other box is for everything else. And you need to know to prioritize the first and not the second.
Such a great answer, and time being what it is, and the live stream percentage being what it is. We'll stay up here for a few minutes for those desperate questions, but it's time to say thank you so much for.
Thank you for having me.